Namaskar, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I'm Tina Jha. You're watching Perspective, the show where we try and give you a 360-degree view on a subject of current significance. Today, we will talk about India's push to boost semiconductor production in the country. The Union Cabinet recently approved a comprehensive program for the development of sustainable semiconductor and display ecosystem in the country, with an outlay of 76,000 crore rupees, which is 10 billion US dollars. The scheme has incentives for every part of supply chain, including electronic components, sub-assemblies, and also finished goods. In total, the Government of India has committed support of 2,30,000 crore rupees, which is 30 billion US dollars, to position India as a global hub for electronics manufacturing, with semiconductors as the foundational building block. Now, coming at a time when the entire world is facing a shortage of semiconductors, analysts say the move could go a long way in establishing India as a global hub for electronics goods, also besides creating jobs and attracting investments from top firms around the world. So what are the broad incentives that have been approved? How will the approved program help India boost its semiconductor capabilities? The practical challenges despite the huge fiscal support, and also the technological collaborations required to propel India towards becoming a semiconductor hub. These are some of the aspects that we will be looking at on the show today with a distinguished panel of experts. So let me first introduce them to you. I'm pleased to welcome on the show today Mr. Ajay Sawhney, Mr. Ajay Prakash Sawhney. He is Secretary, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India. Mr. Ajay Chaudhary is a founder member of the HCL. And Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya, he is Editorial Director of the Business Standard. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on the program today. Mr. Sawhney, allow me to begin the program today with you. So at a time when the world is reeling under the shortage of semiconductors, the move by India to come up with a comprehensive program to help build a strong enough ecosystem for semiconductors, the move is obviously being hailed as a timely one. Help us and our viewers understand more about this scheme and how will it help India boost its domestic production capabilities?
Thank you. The program that has been approved by the Union Cabinet last week is for establishing an India semiconductor mission. And the mission has several components. The very first one among them is bringing the silicon CMOS fabs into India, more than one fab into India, and helping them establish production of the silicon chips here in India. The second part of the scheme focuses on also attracting a display fab. All the displays that we see on electronic equipment are currently imported. And there are again two parts to this. One is the open cells that get fabricated almost the way the silicon, the microprocessors get fabricated. And then there is an assembly of modules. So bringing the actual fab for display also into India is the second major objective. Mm-hmm. The third part of what we are attempting is to bring multiple compound semiconductor units to start establish manufacturing within India. Compound semiconductors refers to certain specialized semiconductors, gallium nitride, gallium arsenide, indium phosphide, silicon carbide. These can be used in high frequency, high voltage, and certain difficult circumstances. And these are becoming increasingly important, especially as we go towards electric vehicles and modernization of power sector, and also in a number of strategic segments. The fourth part of what we are attempting is to bring in multiple ATMP units once a wafer is fabricated in a silicon wafer fab, and the etching is done on that, then such a wafer, which is typically a 12-inch diameter plate, goes to ATMP units, where the cutting, assembling it with the connectors, etc., marking, testing, marking, and packaging. It's typically called ATMP process. So such ATMP units, we hope that at least about 10 such ATMP units will get established in India. In addition to this, the mission also focuses on strengthening the design ecosystem within India. Design is something in which India already has tremendous strength. Indian designers contribute to the design of almost all the major semiconductor chips that get fabricated across, by some of the most prominent companies in the world.
Okay.
And some Indian design houses have also started appearing within India.
Okay.
So the effort is to get to be able to help at least about 100 such companies, tiny, big, small, and big, to bring in more IP, more intellectual property by way of design of chips in India.
Okay, Mr. Bhattacharya.
And then
so obviously
we
there are
would help take them all the way to help them fabricate those chips and deploy those chips with certain incentives.
Sure. Mr. Bhattacharya, so what Mr. Sawhney suggests is there are multiple efforts being undertaken to boost domestic semiconductor capabilities. But for a country where semiconductor imports is 100%, we are spending about $24 billion annually on import of semiconductors. How significant is this move, the comprehensive program, both in terms of strategic importance and also economic self-reliance, which we are aiming at?
Well, I think, it is a very significant move. There's no doubt about it. I see this move, in two ways, actually. If you look at the policy and the parameters that Mr. Sawhney very elaborately explained, what I do see in this clear strategic intent of creating information technology security in a country which badly needs it. Because the IT security is very important in terms of averting or preventing a kind of a future supply shocks that the world had seen in the wake of COVID-19, even earlier, in my view. So a strategic information technology security apparatus is something that we needed, and I think that this policy is moving in that direction of creating information technology security in a country that needs institutions by which the sudden supply shocks in a very critical component like chips and semiconductors and the sensors, the compound semiconductors, display fabs, everything can be looked at. The second, the IT security element that I would like to highlight at this point is that, remember that chips are embedded with designs. And if chips are embedded with designs, these chips, if they're not made under your supervision or not with close monitoring, they can be used for various purposes. One of the reasons why we often don't take chips from other countries is because those chips can actually have embedded in them some sort of monitoring device by which your own information technology and country's strategic installations and things can be compromised. Okay. So it is good to have a domestic industrial base to produce these semiconductors by which we can prevent our and obviate the need for relying on foreign supply sources for such a critical component, which is playing a role in everything from where we are talking right now, or driving your car, or to cooking something, or keeping everything the chips based. So therefore, you need to have that strategic security in mind. And I think this policy can go a long way if implemented and welcomed and embraced by industry. That can go a long way.
Okay.
But the second more important point I would see is this, that it addresses a major value chain gap that existed in this country, to which Mr. Soni alluded.
Yeah.
The gap is that India does have a lot of design houses. Not only the foreign, some of the foreign companies have design houses, even Indian companies are into the design houses business. What we did not have was the fabrication facilities. Now, the moment you have a confluence or a collaboration between the design houses and these the semiconductor facilities, the fab facility, then you can actually plug that value chain gap and play to your strength and occupy a position that is truly yours. India, after all, is an IT giant in that sense. So therefore, I think the two important elements that this policy seeks to achieve are the one, as I said, strategic security, and the second is a value chain gap that has been troubling us for quite some time. There are two other points that I would like to mention, which we need to be mindful of, but I think I will let Mr. Chaudhary speak.
Certainly, I'll come back to you and speak obviously about the practical problems that we might face, the potential roadblocks that could come in our way ahead. But let me go across to Mr. Ajay Chaudhary and get in his perspective on what he thinks of this comprehensive approach, the kind of incentives that have been laid out through this program. Mr. Chaudhary, are these incentives attractive enough for the manufacturers to actually realize the aim of reducing the imports of semiconductors? And obviously, because it's a strategic imperative, we have to move forward. But are these incentives lucrative enough for the manufacturers in the first place?
I think you need to look at this policy in a slightly different way. I think the most important part of the policy is to set up a mission. And I think we need to really work like everything working together, and that's what the mission will do. The second part, which is critical, is that if you look at India's requirements, and if you want to have a semiconductor plant, you must have product design happening. And that's something that the government will be encouraging, and I've been having discussions with MeitY also on this whole issue, that if you actually set up a semiconductor plant, who will fill in the semiconductor plant? The semiconductor plant has to be filled in by design companies and product companies. So very importantly here, a lot of emphasis has been placed on designing chips in India. But another piece that needs to be done over a period of time is design products in India. So if you design products, then the companies who design products in India will also want to use chips from India. And that would make the whole ecosystem complete. So I think there's a very clear direction from MeitY in terms of looking at chip to system and system to chip. I think both are essential. And the most critical aspect, which is I think I like about this whole whole policy, is that they're looking at both areas. They're looking at the silicon area, they're looking at the compound semiconductor area, and they're also looking at utilizing an existing facility, converting that, like the semiconductor lab that is there in Mohali, to make it a commercial product. So commercial organization. So I think that will make the availability of all kinds of capability in terms of actually making having a fab in India. But most importantly, along with design, you have ATMP, you have fab. All of these have to work together. And finally, you have to have products that are designed in India. And that's, I think, very critical, that if we want to make sure that semiconductor utilization increases, the decision for semiconductor is generally made by product companies. Today, if you look at all our phone companies, for example, whether that's Apple or it's Samsung or it's a Chinese company, the decision for components are made in those countries. So they won't buy components from us in the semiconductor plant. So we need to start to look at that area also very critically if we want to have a very successful semiconductor capability development in this country. And good news is that it will take 3 to 4 years to set something up. So from now onwards, we need to start to work on doing designs in India, creating products in India, and then doing actual fabless design and taking it to the final stage of manufacturing the chip.
Okay, Mr. Bhattacharya, so a very well-intentioned approach and a massive push to realizing our goal of Atmanirbhar Bharat as well. But what are the challenges that we are staring at, considering the fact that despite the global reliance increasing on semiconductor chips, there are just a handful of countries worldwide which are dominating this particular sector. So what are the challenges looking from the perspective of India that we could potentially face while realizing the vision of making India a global hub?
Well, as you rightly pointed out, that there are challenges, and the policy is, in a way, a response to meeting those challenges. And I think, as I said earlier, that there is, if there is a 30 to 50% fiscal support of the project cost, of the capital cost, that, to my mind, should be an attractive proposition for industry to come. And as we know that there are quite a few companies, like an Israeli company, like even an Indian Vedanta group is being talked about. There's a tower company, there's a Foxconn is being talked about. So it is not that companies will not come forward and they will not set up these facilities. And as Mr. Chaudhary said, the great idea of this entire scheme is not just about the production link incentive scheme for semiconductor complexes, but also for reviving a plant that I remember in my younger days was actually gutted in fire in Mohali. And now if that is being revived, and there are many advantages of reviving something, and somebody can make really commercial capital. And as I said, it is a strategic move. But what are the challenges going forward? I think there are two key challenges because, there are three big things that you need for a semiconductor complex, a semiconductor revival facility in this country, in any country for that matter. You need abundant supply of pure water. That's a very, very critical input. You need 24/7 electricity supply. And the third thing that you need is a decent, a large area of land. Now, in our country, being a quasi-federal structure, all the three areas that I mentioned, 24/7 power supply, pure water supply, and land availability, these are all in the domain of the states. So in my view, the center can make the policy, make it attractive, try to incentivize industry to come forward and set them up. But it will require a tremendous involvement of the states to come forward and make those things available, both in terms of pure water availability, in terms of providing electricity and providing land. So if the policy does not sort of gel well with the states that should be partners in this entire project, my sense is that the goals that this policy seeks to achieve probably may meet some major hurdles. Absolutely. And my second worry and the challenges is that remember that the states that have pure water availability are also, unfortunately in our country, are also environmentally fragile. A state like Himachal Pradesh has a huge amount of water availability. Now, the question of making pure water available is also environmentally can be a challenging proposition. So the environmental issues also need to be kept in mind before we can realize the dream, and a very legitimate dream in my view, for achieving self-sufficiency in a critical sector like semiconductor. But okay. I think these are achievable things. There's a mission approach, and if this mission approach with the fiscal support, India can emerge out of this strategically insecure situation of fearing a supply shock anytime when there is a global issues coming up. So I think these are two challenges that one has to face, but these are not insurmountable challenges. It requires state-centered collaboration. It requires major push to infrastructure development, and of course, keeping an eye that the focus on pure water availability does not compromise our environmental security.
Mr. Sawhney, so in
I would say
addition to
at
the
this stage,
huge
these are
costs that
challenges.
are involved and the host of challenges that Mr. Bhattacharya mentioned related to climate change, availability of pure water, the rapid pace of changing technology is also something that has to be taken into account. So on that front, what are the kind of efforts that are being undertaken as far as technological collaborations are concerned, as far as giving a fillip to innovation is concerned? What are the kind of efforts, the initiatives that are being undertaken?
I think that's addressed to me. The on these technologies, underlying technologies in semiconductors are very closely held technologies. There are very few companies worldwide that have the full stack of technologies or are able to license them to others. There are also relatively few players in this in the area of setting up of semiconductor fabs, and very few countries again are involved. So in this, when we move forward, we would look towards some of the companies that have the core technological capabilities and the sort of IP for those technologies. Those companies that have the experience in setting up such fabs, and also major Indian industry houses that might also look at getting into the electronics and the semiconductor business with the technology from suitable partners. So from our side, we would welcome multiple such endeavors to be there, because semiconductors, the demand typically of use of semiconductors is about 25% of the bill of materials that goes into any electronic product is made up of semiconductors, and that with the huge growth that we are witnessing in manufacturing of electronics in India, this demand will also grow at sort of more than 25% year on year.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of demand which is already available, which has to be satisfied. So whichever ventures come in also have to look at which part of the demand they would be focusing on. So these are some of the key issues. One of the issues that Ashok ji has highlighted of availability of land, water supply, the stable electric power. I think we have already done a fair amount of recce in this area along with the state governments. And I think we have a fair amount of confidence on that front. So we have a number of states which today are ready with land parcels, and they understand how much water is required. They understand the type of redundant power supply and stable power supply that is required for these purposes.
Okay.
Also, that these have to be in seismic certain seismic zones where so it's a very specialized kind of a requirement, but we have shared that with many states, and many states have come forward with that. So I don't see that as a very difficult challenge. The getting the best technology players and getting the right sort of collaborations in place, I think is going to be a critical aspect of success as we move forward.
Mr. Chaudhary, so obviously what we've gathered from the discussion is that these fabrication units require high precision optics, and technological collaboration is one area that also we have to work on, because very few companies worldwide hold these technological know-hows. One area, again, is the highly skilled manpower that will be required going forward if we have to make India the global hub that we're talking about. Now, India, fortunately, has a very good pool of engineers. How can their potential be tapped?
We have a chip to system, a chip to startup program.
Let me take that question to Mr. Chaudhary.
Okay.
Well, actually, if you look at the capability of design, and as Ashokji mentioned, there is great capability of design in this country. And for many, many years, engineers in India have been designing for the world, whether it is global companies or Indian companies. Even within HCL, we must have close to 5 to 10,000 people who just design for the world. So there are enough capability available as far as design is concerned. But yes, the manufacturing capability does not exist. Very little of it is available in SCL, and that's all. So I think that's really where we will need to get our people trained, and the collaboration, the collaborators who come in and bring technology will create that capability. But on the other hand, the country will also have to start working on research and training of these kind of people. So I think if you look at all the major locations where semiconductor plants are located, they also have a research institute. And that research work is important because we need to create our own capability in terms of running the plant correctly with all the right needs that are there for the plant. So that is part one. Part two, as I said, the design capability exists. So that is not the issue. And I think this program also is talking about training more than 50,000 people over the next 4 to 5 years, as I heard the Honorable Minister say the other day.
Absolutely, it does. And what's required is that it has to be implemented effectively. As Mr. Bhattacharya also pointed out, it's a very well-intentioned approach, but the key lies in the implementation as well. And also, there are several challenges, but these are not insurmountable. And these can be, solutions are there to these challenges as well. And going forward, we should be able to realize the vision of making India a global hub of superconductors manufacturing, semiconductors manufacturing as well. So with that, I'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of Perspective. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program today and sharing your thoughts with us and our viewers. It was a pleasure having you on the show. So that's it from us on Perspective today. Thanks very much to all our viewers for their time.